In this video, I'm going to be assembling the frame of my chicken tractor. Because I had designed the frame in SketchUp, I already had lengths for the various cuts I needed to make. I did all the cuts using a compound miter saw. With a little planning, I was able to utilize almost all of my existing 2x4 stock with very little waste. Using 7-inch blocks of wood as connectors allowed me to get the most out of what I had. My garage floor is neither level nor flat, so assembling the bottom of the frame was a bit of a mess. I didn't worry about squareness particularly in the initial assembly. That said, once I was able to do so, I did try to keep everything as square as possible after that. To avoid cracking the wood, I drilled pilot holes for all of the screws. Having 2 cordless drills, or a drill and a driver, made this go a lot faster. Also, if you're working on a concrete surface like this, I can't recommend strongly enough that you wear knee pads. Over the course of this build, I knelt on my right knee for several hours on the concrete. In case you hadn't noticed, I'm not exactly a floating waif of a guy, and I did enough damage to my knee that I had genuine trouble walking for almost 3 weeks. A couple of bucks for knee pads would have saved me a whole lot of trouble. As I went, my general strategy was to attach the connecting blocks at their proper locations, and then install the uprights at those positions, making sure they were square. My daughter came out to observe and critique my work for a while, which I enjoy. The shorter verticals support the fencing that forms the roof of the yard portion of the tractor. The taller verticals are part of the hen house. They're tall enough that the birds will be able to have sufficient headroom inside the coop, as well as a shaded and rain-protected outdoor area. So at this point, I've got most of the 2x4 construction done. I still have to attach the roof and the sides of the hen house. I forgot to make 2 of the 4 side rails. I just made them for the bottom, but I neglected to make the ones for the top. The roof overhangs them in my drawing, and so I missed them. I also need to make a bunch of cuts of 2x2s at this point, because the 2x2s are going to be what supports those side rails in the hen house. I'm going to cut some more parts and hopefully get this frame at least assembled tonight. Alright, the next step. I have 2 pieces, one of which I had actually already screwed into the frame and I had to remove, that need a small relief cut in so that the door is going to be able to slide up and down behind them. Again, I'm going to do that on a table saw. This is going to take a lot of cuts, but it's just back and forth a million times and it'll be done. To do this sort of thing, all you have to do is adjust your table saw so that the highest tooth is at the depth you want. In this case, I'm looking for 1/2 inch. So when this cuts, the highest the saw will ever go is 1/2 inch. And if I'm patient and make enough cuts, then I'll have a nice 1/2 inch chunk removed out of this. Another probably simpler way to do this would be with a router table, but I don't have one. So here you can see the finished relief. It went really well. I had to flip the board around because the length of the cut was too long, and so as I cut, it would have dropped down over the edge of my sled and dug into the wood. I actually noticed before that happened, so I spun the board around and went at the other half of it, and it would have just about fit. There's maybe 1/4 inch at the end where I had to hold the wood really tightly against the fence and work like that with just one end supported. The reason for this is I got distracted. My daughter walked by and wasn't paying very good attention and chopped it. Back to the assembly. Here I'm reinstalling the piece that I cut the relief from. I also am putting in a couple of the 2x2 pieces for the front framework of the hen house. This is one of the few spots where I have hidden screws. The upright 2x2s are required to retain the front plywood of the hen house, and the horizontal 2x2 is the attachment beam for the roof of the yard. Getting it all together wasn't particularly difficult, but it did require lots of small adjustments to make sure everything fit properly. So unless you've got perfect lumber, which is unlikely, sooner or later you're going to have a board that does something like this. I don't know if it's real obvious, but there's a bit of a twist in this. The other end is nice and straight, but this end is a little wonky. So we want it to be in line with these boards, but also flat. So it wants to be at an angle. We want it to be like so. An easy way to apply pressure to this, because if you just try and grab this board with your hand and twist it, well, if it's a very thin, wide board, you can do that. But for something like this little 2x2, you just don't have any leverage. Putting a clamp on it and then using the clamp as a handle lets you get quite a bit of motion out of the board. So there you go. So here I'm just finishing up for the night, assembling the frame of the tractor. None of this work was particularly difficult, but I will say that it was time consuming, just getting everything together. Had I had a partner, this all would have gone much more quickly. And I know that if I were to do this again, I could do it easily twice as fast. So it's been a fairly long day for me. I've probably worked on this another 6 hours today total, minus a couple when I went to town. You can see the frame's pretty much all together. I've still got to put the roof on, but I just sort of test fit it, and it looks like it's, shockingly enough, it looks like it's right. As far as how heavy this is so far, I can still easily lift the end of it with one arm, the light end anyway. The heavy end, I can lift with one arm, but it's heavy, shockingly enough. I like this a little bit here. I hope it turns out and actually functions the way I intend. The relief cut into the back of those two horizontal members and the two little corners out of the verticals there are intended to be door guides. The door will slide up and down between those and a sheet of plywood. So hopefully that works out when I get to it. I've still got doors to put on this thing and all sorts of fun. So yeah. It's almost midnight, so good night. This is the next day. I'm fitting the diagonals for the roof as well as the cross beam at the peak of the roof. In order to hold them in place while I got everything fit together and screwed in place, I used a spare block of wood and a pair of clamps to keep things from moving around too much. Of course, that's not visible here because I'm using super fast forward, but if you go right to the beginning of this fast forward section, you'll see what I'm talking about. So I got my gate all together. I'd originally only planned on putting 4 of these large brackets on, one on each corner, well, yeah, and 2 on the front face of the door, 2 on the back face of the door. So you can see two big brackets, and then there are 2 more big brackets on the opposite side. When I did that, it was very floppy. It just didn't work. I found a couple small brackets in my shop, in my junk drawer, and put those on, but then I was too short, so I pounded an old zinc-plated electrical box flat, and cut a couple L brackets out of the sheet metal that it was made from, and that really stiffened up the door. It's solid as rock now. In terms of its flexibility this way and that way. So especially once I get the fence stapled onto there, the hardware cloth, it should be very solid. I hung this in kind of an odd way. I used door hinges that I bought at the Restore, the Habitat for Humanity resale store. So these are only $1 a piece. And they're nice brass door hinges. I hung one side of them, well, you know, a door hinge normally is screwed onto the inside of both pieces of the door. I screwed onto one side of the gate and onto the other side of the frame. So this gate's only capable of opening to a little more than 90 degrees, but I don't see any need for it to open, you know, 180 degrees. Lying flat against the side of the hen house isn't going to do me any good. And this way was easier to hang it. Last thing before I prime the frame, I got the latches installed on the big gate, one at the top, one at the bottom. They're a little tight. Instead of having the catch for the barrel of the barrel lock here, or the barrel, I guess, for the bolts of the barrel lock, mounted to this, I had to mount it sideways. These come with a hole drilled in the end, so you can use them like a strike plate. And so that's what I did. I drilled through
Once I mounted it, I drilled through the end of the strike plate into the board so that this can seat completely inside the wood. It's a little tight at the moment. I didn't quite get everything lined up perfectly, but it's easy enough to do with two hands to latch and unlatch. So I'm happy with it. Now, finally, the painting.